launch of the 6th edition of the publication, Job Creation and Local Economic Development. We have people here in the OECD headquarters, and we have a lot of people also online. This is a hybrid event, and I would like to mention that a translation is provided in French. So for people online, they are also able to push the right button. So this is the report. This is the new baby. This report is the flagship of the Local Employment and Economic Development Committee. We call it the LEAD Committee, which for more than 40 years has led work to help countries, cities, and regions understand how global trends affect local labor markets and how governments at all levels should respond, because geography matters. This work has shown us the uneven geographic impact of different crises, as well as from transition, including, for instance, the changing nature of work, like automation and the green transition. And the focus of this year's report, set against a backdrop of tightening labor markets across the globe, is the new geography of generative AI, a topic that could not be more topical. Policymakers around the world are seeking to both understand the impact of AI on local labor markets and harness its benefit in improving employment policy and services. This publication helped them both, showing which regions and communities are most and least exposed to generative AI, and drawing examples from the health of all OECD public employment services, national and local, who have already, by the way, implemented AI solutions. This report marks a major contribution to the OECD growing body on artificial intelligence. So now we will begin with remarks from our Secretary General, Matthias Cormann. We will then hear from the report's lead author, Lucas Klein-Roschkamp, before a panel, which will be moderated by Karen Maguire, who is the head of the Local Employment and Social Innovation Division in the Center. So now, without further delay, a message from the OECD Secretary General, please.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this launch of the 2024 edition of the OECD Job Creation and Local Economic Development Report, our flagship biennial publication assessing the latest trends in regional labour markets and local economic development policy. This year's edition includes a focus on the impact of generative AI for labour markets across 34 OECD countries. In recent years, employment growth has been comparatively strong across countries and regions. Indeed, across the OECD in May this year, there were 662 million people in employment, or 24 million more than in December 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Across 83% of regions, the workforce participation of women has also increased, helping to narrow the gender gap in employment. While this labour market dynamism has benefited most regions, regional gaps in job creation have persisted. The most dynamic regions are experiencing acute labour shortages. For example, in 2022, the ratio of vacancies over unemployment in Lombardy, a measure of labour market tightness, was 45% higher than Italy's national average. And in Hamburg, in Germany, it was 2 times the national level. In contrast, some regions still have untapped workforce potential. Across 7 OECD countries, in at least a third of regions, more than 40% of the working age population was not in employment. And similar gaps persist in terms of productivity. In 2022, in 2/3 of OECD countries, productivity in the most productive region was at least 50% higher than in the least productive region. And over the decade between 2012 and 2022, around 19% of OECD regions actually recorded negative productivity growth. The advent of generative AI will generate new employment opportunities, and it will enhance productivity. but the effects may vary across regions. This report shows that 32% of urban workers across OECD countries for which data is available think their productivity would increase significantly with the help of AI, reporting that at least 1 in 5 of their tasks could be done twice as fast with generative AI tools. And in the Brussels region, Budapest, Luxembourg, Prague and Stockholm, about 50% of workers could see their productivity increase with AI tools. Productivity gains will also have an impact outside of cities, although to a lesser extent, with only 21% of workers in rural areas expecting to benefit from generative AI. We need to ensure that people in all regions have the best possible opportunity to benefit from new technologies such as AI and to be able to seize the opportunities to use technology to reduce regional divides. First, by developing upskilling and lifelong learning programs that anticipate and help address future workforce requirements. Local and regional governments can play a key role in bridging the gap between existing skills and future job requirements by engaging with local employers and tailoring training programs to their needs. These programs can facilitate the employment transition for workers whose jobs are negatively affected by AI and help provide targeted support for less skilled workers in working with new technologies. For example, in Canada, their Future Skills Centre leverages local universities to provide training, including supporting healthcare professionals with adopting AI technologies and providing short duration training programs for workers that might not otherwise have access to skills development opportunities. Second, by accelerating the deployment of high-speed broadband in rural regions. Currently, across 26 OECD countries, a third of households in rural areas do not have access to high-speed broadband. By comparison, on average across the OECD, only 1 in 10 households do not have access to high-speed broadband. Governments can accelerate the deployment of high-speed communication infrastructure to help rural workers and businesses adopt AI tools. For instance, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund in the United States employs a reverse auction mechanism to finance high-speed broadband networks in rural and remote areas of the country. Third, by facilitating the labour market integration of younger workers. The gap in labour force participation between workers aged 25 to 64 and younger workers aged 15 to 24 widened in half of OECD regions. Active labour market policies such as job search assistance and support for starting a new business that can help contribute to closing this gap. Local and regional governments are well positioned to support young people in finding local jobs that match their skills profile and in filling their applications. In Flanders, the Job Bereik tool uses AI to match job seekers with occupations and training based on their skills and experience. The OECD recommendation on creating better opportunities for youth also highlights opportunities to facilitate the transition of young people in the labour market, including by enhancing work-based learning and career guidance. In closing, sound and well-tailored regional development policies are essential to help ensure that generative AI reaches its full potential as a powerful engine for continued dynamism in the fastest growing regions and as a tool for closing regional divides, ultimately providing more and better quality opportunities for workers right across the OECD. Thank you for listening to me.
So thank you very much to the OECD Secretary General, and obviously his key message is geography matters when it comes to generative AI. And now we are going to hear from Lucas. He's going to tell us the key findings from this report.
Great. Thank you very much, Lamia. I'm delighted to share some of the key findings and highlights from this report. You'll find plenty of more material findings, recommendations in the report itself. the policy highlights as well as in the country notes. So let me just check if this is working. Yes, it is. Great. So against the backdrop that of record high employment rates in the OECD that the Secretary General of the OECD just highlighted, a closer look at the actual health of regional labor markets within countries, in fact, reveals a mixed picture. On the one hand, we see regional labor markets that have been very resilient in light of the COVID pandemic, but also other crises and other shocks. On the other hand, they face both new and persistent challenges. Let me point out a few. The first one is regional disparities that remain persistent and substantial. We see that in half of OECD countries, regional differences in the employment rate exceeds 10 percentage points. And there's also been, over the last decade, no meaningful convergence in closing this gap. Noteworthy also is that regions that really usually significantly lead the way in terms of employment rates and labor market outcomes include capital regions or regions with a strong focus on tradable sectors. Similarly, the recovery from COVID has been extremely uneven. In 18 OECD countries, we see both regions that have fully recovered, but also regions that are yet finding the employment rates be below pre-pandemic levels. And overall, we see that almost 1/3 of OECD regions, 1 in 3, have not reached yet their pre-COVID employment rates. In terms of inclusion, as the Secretary General pointed out, the gender gap really between men and women really has been falling significantly. And so in 4 out of 5 regions, almost 85% of regions. However, and this is important to point out, the age gap, so age gaps between youth and other workers have actually grown in 60% of regions, especially so in metropolitan regions. And what we see in the data is that the labor market outcomes of young people really started to deteriorate during the pandemic and have never really fully recovered since. And finally, many places struggle with sluggish productivity growth, which affects, of course, living standards and prosperity. We see that half of OECD countries recorded annual productivity growth of less than 1% per year, 0.8% in fact. And even worse, in 1 in 5 regions, labor productivity even fell. And then again, similarly to what we observed for labor market outcomes, we see that there's actually been no significant convergence between regions in countries, with leading regions still remaining 2 times more productive than low productivity regions in the same country. In this context that we just discussed of high employment rates, but also in the context of aging, new skills requirements, and changing worker preference, another major challenge for many OECD regions are labor shortages. Simply put, employers really struggle to find suitable workers that can fill vacancies, holding back both productivity as well as local economic growth. And it's important to point out that country-level headlines mask important nuances on the degree and the region-specific drivers of shortages, which range from shortages of labor, of bodies in a sense, of skills, but also attractiveness in terms of the place where jobs are located, or job quality or the attractiveness of different jobs. Our analysis shows that labor markets have in fact become much tighter in the sense of shortages rising, and those shortages have in fact spread to all regions, not only those regions that have been struggling with labor shortages for some time already. But again, the devil lies in the detail. The extent of labor shortages differs widely within countries. On average, the region facing the highest labor shortages has more than 5 times as many vacancies per unemployed person than the region that is the least tight in the same country. And not on the slide, but with those of you familiar with the demographics of our regions, it is important to point out that given that already 40% of OECD regions report declining working age populations, demographic pressure could exacerbate labor shortages in the short, medium, and long run. And again, especially in the more remote regions, which are aging the fastest. Another element of analysis looks at the green and digital twin transition. And here, disconcerningly, we see that regional labor shortages are particularly striking for digital and green talent. For example, shortages in ICT jobs are at least twice as high as for other jobs in over 6 out of 10 regions. And for green jobs, we see a similar pattern. Shortages for green jobs are around a third higher than shortages for other jobs. Now, this scarcity of green digital talent reflects, of course, a rising demand, but also significant skill mismatches resulting from this process of structural transformation that our local economies are undergoing. This transformation has not yet been met by the changes to our education and local skills and training systems that help the workforce to adapt. And crucially, why this actually matters, these shortages really pose significant risks in terms of scaling up green sectors, but also seizing the opportunities, including of AI, the opportunities, the benefits of digitalization and artificial intelligence. We'll not go into detail any of this, but just to know that while these challenges for regional economies appear substantial, policymakers already do have a number of useful measures and tools at their disposal to address slow productivity, aging, and labor shortages. And the report discusses these in quite extensive detail. But one important factor that I think we need to highlight here is that those policies ideally need to be tailored to place-specific drivers of shortages and low productivity growth to be effective in the first place. Now, among those levers, if you take a close look, new technologies play a crucial role in terms of labor market information systems, labor market intelligence, data, but also AI. And we spent the rest of the presentation on this. Over the past 2 years, we have really seen spectacular technological progress, perhaps best embodied through the rise of large language models or generative AI. What stands out is really their capacity, but also their use, the ease of use and access. It's basically accessible to all of us, which is really something different from past technological innovation. And these new technologies, AI technologies, could offer potentially a strategic tool for OECD regions to address critical economic and labor market challenges, such as labor shortages or low productivity growth. For instance, by leveraging AI technologies to directly supplement workers and their skills, or by helping to access untapped potential or talent in, for instance, low-skilled workers or workers with disabilities. But what is important to point out is that seizing those opportunities to augment workers really depends on a number of enabling factors, and two really stand out. The first one is it needs to be supported by the right training to equip workers with the skills to use generative AI effectively. And secondly, generative AI and AI in general needs to be adopted and used by firms in the first place for us to talk about any benefits at all. But at the same time, we shouldn't discard or ignore some of the inherent risks, for instance, on job displacement of some workers due to automation or job quality. And I think one of the main questions that we see that everyone working on this that really poses is whether generative AI will augment or automate workers and their skills. And the honest answer from us right now is that it's too early to judge. It's too early to say. But I should point out that when we look at evidence of past technology-led automation, we find relatively positive signs or signals. Overall, automation did not lead to major net job losses in OECD regions. And in most places, in fact, new jobs more than compensated job losses due to automation. But there's one very important caveat. Those new jobs did not necessarily accrue or help displaced workers. So the people that lost their jobs did not necessarily benefit from new jobs emerging. And hence, really one important takeaway in terms of policy emphasis is that a lot of emphasis should be also on workers, should be placed on workers that face heightened risk job risk as AI finds greater adoption. So in this report, we use new detailed data on generative AI's ability to do different tasks of different jobs to measure the exposure of workers and regional labor markets to generative AI. And to break this down into a nutshell, a job is considered exposed to generative AI if at least 20% of its task could be done twice as fast with the use of generative AI technologies. And important to point out again, this is probably a conservative measure because these technologies are so rapidly evolving and are increasingly integrated with existing software, both of which could deepen and widen generative AI's ability to speed up work tasks and reap productivity gains. Two important points that need to be mentioned here. Exposure does not mean use of AI. Whether jobs are actually transformed very much depends on whether AI is actually adopted by firms. And the second point to point out is that exposure could be both good or bad, it could be positive or negative. The actual impact is very likely sector, context, or place specific for different workers in different communities and different sectors. So, in the interest of time, let me highlight 4 significant results that we find in our report. The first one is that generative AI could have a wider labor market impact than previous automation technologies. We see that already more than a quarter of workers in the OECD are exposed to generative AI, and this share could exceed over 70% or even more in the near future as AI finds greater adoption and integration it could reach more than 80% in some places. Just to give you some context, already AI can help software developers in writing, analyzing, or reviewing codes, or help translators, since we have some here interpreters, translate, proofread, or edit material. The second point, second finding to mention is that the possible impact of generative AI is very geography specific, so it differs widely across places. In some regions, exposure already reaches almost half of workers, and across the OECD, across OECD regions overall, we see that it ranges from 13 to 48%. On average, such exposure is of the labor force to generative AI differs by up to 70% between regions in the same country. One, again, striking feature is that metropolitan regions are significantly more exposed to this technology than other regions. Third, we find very significant urban-rural differences. Within AI, generative AI already able to transform 32% of urban jobs compared to 21% of rural jobs. And in view of the possible benefits that the SD also discussed in terms of labor productivity, this gap could widen already existing economic gaps between cities and other places. We see that in some countries, generative AI could transform 2 to 3 times more jobs in cities, in urban areas than in rural areas. Now let's turn to the fourth and last really important finding, which is the geography and the contrast between other forms of innovation. When we look at the geography, the geographic impact of generative AI, we see a reversal of the geography of previous automation technologies. In essence, regions that previously faced lower risk of automation are now most exposed to generative AI, and vice versa. So for instance, here on the top left, you would find a lot of metropolitan regions highly exposed to generative AI, very little exposed to previous automation technologies. In the bottom right, you would see most likely non-metropolitan, more remote regions that are less exposed to generative AI and more exposed to automation technologies. So what explains this reversal? It is probably mainly explained by the fact that generative AI, in contrast to other previous technologies, really excels at cognitive tasks, which results in a greater impact on high-skilled workers rather than low-skilled workers. And again, that stands in contrast to these previous automation technologies. And this, in turn, explains the high exposure in metro regions and cities. Right, so what can policymakers do? 1 second. Just to sum it up a little bit, some of the findings. In short, we see enormous potential for generative AI to transform jobs, but also to help address critical issues such as alleviating labor shortages or catalyzing much needed productivity growth in OECD regions. Again, seizing those opportunities of AI for all in all places while managing at risk does, however, require decisive policies, local actions, and measures. And in the interest of time, let me just point out 3 overarching priorities. The first one is that policymakers should embrace AI to pursue place-specific solutions to boost regional resilience. We see quite promising international examples of regions that work hard to identify their weaknesses and their strengths to determine tangible opportunities where AI can drive regional growth or help reinvent the local economy. But a major objective in this regard really must be that we enable all places to not just simply regional frontrunners or cities to benefit from AI in the first place. And among other things, this does require and highlights the importance of good digital infrastructure in all places. The second priority is on workforce planning and local training systems, both of which are essential. And this should include tailored support for workers that might lose their job or will lose their job, helping them to transition into new roles or new sectors. But it should also entail the revision of local skill systems to make them more adaptable and enable a greater proportion of workers to use AI effectively, so basic digital skills or advanced digital skills. And it should also include social dialogue to set clear AI guidelines to manage or control some of the risk on workers on places. And this dialogue would inevitably also support accessibility of these technologies in the workplace. And the third and last priority is on firms. We need to give businesses the support they need to use and leverage AI to boost their productivity. Among other things, this should entail raising awareness of the possible benefits of AI to workers and firms, fostering trust through careful experimentation, and improving the uptake of AI, especially in small and medium-sized enterprises which face greater capacity constraints. And of course, it all refers back to the first 2 points, the first priorities, the place-specific issues and the workforce planning, because firms need a skilled workforce and good digital infrastructure to adopt AI successfully. This is very much only a snapshot of the insights, recommendations, and international examples you can find in the report. So please feel free to read the report or reach out if you have any questions. And with that, I'll stop here and hand over back to Lamia and Karen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Excellent, Lucas. This is really a great work, and I know that many other colleagues, Karen, we acknowledge them at the end, have contributed to this really very interesting, forward-looking report. I'm going now to hand over to Karen, but before I want to mention that the report and the country notes, they are now available on the OECD website, so you can have access to both. Karen is going to moderate a very interesting panel with speakers, amazing speakers from stakeholder and private sector organizations who are with us today. So now up to you, Karen.
Great. So I think we're just going to call our panelists up, get everyone set. So quick scene change. Okay, great. So we'll be able to get started now. We heard a lot of data I hope you got it all. There'll be a test at the end. Just kidding. So now we'll get started with the panel. So we have a number of folks with us both in person and online. So I'm just going to very briefly introduce them because when we go one by one, we'll be able to go into a little bit more detail. So I just wanted to flag online. Maybe we can show Sonja van Leeshout, who's Global Head of Public Affairs at Randstad, and also leadership with the World Employment Confederation. Well, we'll see her in a second, I guess, when we get to when they show the Zoom. We also have Eric Perez, who is the General Secretary of Force Ouvrière Cadre, and also Vice President of the Association pour l'Emploi des Cadres, APEC. We have Ulrich Schaaf, who is with us from Skill Lab. He's the CEO. And we have Sebastiano Toffoletti, who's the Secretary General at the European Digital SME Alliance. So join me in welcoming them. So we have representation from firms big and small. We have representations of the voice of workers, and we have representation of the folks that are trying to help workers and firms get together. So let's get started. So first, maybe if we could pull up Sonja van Leeshout, who's online. Can we show her from the Zoom? There we go. Great to see you, Sonja. Thank you so much for joining us. And you're coming to us with, as we mentioned, a couple of hats, both Global Head of Public Affairs for Randstad, a multinational human resource consulting firm, helping companies find, retain, and skill workers for their jobs, but also a hat with the World Employment Confederation that represents the voice of private employment services industry. And thanks again to Business at OECD for helping to bring you here today. Now, I know we heard in the report, of course, labor shortages are one of the biggest challenges facing our labor markets. It used to be only the hot labor markets. Now we see it in almost all OECD regions. And I know you have worked on a campaign, The Work We Want, that actually sees that 4 out of 5 business leaders are saying that talent planning has never been more difficult and that we need to really rethink how we retain talent. And so I'm wondering, Sonja, could you jump in here and talk a little bit about your views wearing these different hats on the challenges for businesses and their clients that are facing labor shortages and productivity challenges and how generative AI can really help?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And first of all, thank you so much for allowing me to join online. It's a pleasure to be with you. Of course, online, I would have loved to be there in person, but online is the next best thing I can say. And indeed, with regards to the Work We Want campaign, it's a campaign that we launched from the World Employment Confederation side. So the WEC, in terms of abbreviation, is the industry association for flexible workforce solutions, covering, amongst others, agency work, but also direct recruitment, RPO, MSP, career management, and much, much more than that, of course. So within the recently launched the campaign, which is titled The Work We Want, we actually found out from business leaders interviews that in fact 81% of the senior executives believe that AI and other tech disruptions will force organizations to radically rethink skills and resources across large areas of the workforce. That's only one part. The second part is, in fact, that 78% of those same business leaders are very much concerned that their organization is not able to train the employees fast enough to keep up with the technological advancements and developments in the next 3 years. So when you take a good look at the outcomes that Lucas has just presented, deployment, but also tapping into the untapped potential in the labor market is of the utmost necessity in order to keep up with the increasing consumer production patterns in a way. There are a lot of transitions to be facilitated from decreasing sectors to increasing sectors. To name a few, the care economy, that's including the healthcare economy, but also childcare, for example. We are looking at transport and logistics, and there are much more sectors that will be impacted by the development of Gen AI and AI in general, of course. So all those transitions have to be facilitated. And we're looking at a high proportion of people that will need to make those transitions in a way where certain parts of those people will have formal educations and others will have no formal education, such as diplomas, certificates, etc., to be able to make that transition. So in order to support and facilitate those transitions, we have to focus up on skills-based hiring. And Gen AI can help with that to realize the match between demand and supply in a much more effective and efficient way. But also, of course, we still need the human touch in that specific area to make sure that all skills are taken into account and not only the formal skills in that sense. Next to that, from our own Randstad research, which we have actually launched 2 weeks ago, it's a report which is diving into the underlying drivers and solutions with regards to labor market scarcity on the labor market. We actually have been investigating and researching the topic of AI and equity. And you see there that AI is definitely a great tool. Gen AI is definitely a great tool to support what we call intergenerational solidarity. Just to give you a bit of a few examples here, 78% of AI skilled workers are men and 29% are actually women. So there's still a gender gap of 42 percentage points in that sense. And that is something that we have to address when it comes to AI skilling, of course. When we look at the intergenerational solidarity, we see that over 1/5 of the so-called baby boom generation have been offered AI skilling, for example, compared to almost half of the Gen Z workers. So there's also a clear signal for employers to be taking into account when we talk about training, skilling, including re- and upskilling people in the AI area. When we talk about AI and equity and focus up on people that have to enter the labor market with a disability, we see that 55% of talent with disabilities use AI to problem solve things at work, compared to those talents without a disability, which only cover 39%. So yes, I'm optimistic. But at the same time, we really have to look at how we can ensure that all talents can access skilling and training in the field of AI in order to enhance their employability for the future labor market to come, in fact. So with that, Karen, I'll close off and give the floor back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sonia. And you mentioned also a very important skills-based hiring. I know it's something you're looking at in your work, but that I think is a great segue to Ulrich Schaaf from Skill Lab. And Skill Lab actually works with employment and career service clients using technology to create more equitable labor markets through the language of skills, and actually received a 2019 Google AI Impact Challenge Award for the work. And I know you saw, of course, from the results of the study, of course, some of these big geographic differences in exposure to AI. But I mean, you're using this as a tool for your work and helping to match people to jobs. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe reflect a little bit on the results.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for being here. So first of all, I believe with Skill Lab, we're quite an interesting case where on one hand, we use AI and the potential of AI to provide solutions to labor and education markets, while at the same time, labor and education markets are heavily affected by AI. But as you highlighted also in the report that was just published, there's a huge impact on the labor shortage given by the skill gaps and skill mismatches. So the big question is, how do we address the skill gap? And from our perspective is obviously through skills. And the way we do it is that we train the central AI and neural network to understand every person as a set of skills, every vacancy, every job as skills that are required or necessary for this job, as well as training as the skills that you learn when you do this training. And this way, we can take these three very different data objects as people, jobs, and education, and understand them through one data language and reconnect and rewire them. And that allows us to create more efficient, more inclusive, and more dynamic labor markets, and most importantly, address skill mismatches and skill gaps. I think a really good example of this is in the Ukraine, where we work with the Ukrainian government and the World Bank, where the Ukraine faces obviously the very intense situation of a lot of unemployment caused through the war, but also a lot of vacancies triggered equally through the war, and a lot of movement from the east to the west. And so that creates skill mismatches, skill gaps, and how do we address it? And in this case, we roll out our technology across the employment service, now in 3 different regions, profile the skills of people that are now looking for an employment, and can match it directly to the available catalog of training and education sponsored by the government. And through that, we create these upskilling pathways to the open vacancies that are now available in the West. And the side product of not only helping individuals in this is that the Ukrainian government gets a data-driven perspective of what are the skills of people that are right now looking for work, what is our training covering, and also in the vacancies, what are employers looking for? And that allows for much more targeted policies and decisions and how you can use labor markets and training to really address a very, very difficult situation. And there are countless other examples. Maybe I can get to them later. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I think a really poignant example where geography matters as well, and how this generative AI is actually being used to help create well functioning labor markets that can also be more inclusive. So for those who don't speak French, I'm going to ask you now to switch on your headsets or check in on the Zoom. So I just wanted to bring to the table Eric Perez. And Eric has a few different hats that I think he's bringing to the table here. So one is with Force Ouvrière Cadre, which is in English, you would say, I guess, executives or managers. So it's a trade union. And thanks again to the Trade Union Advisory Committee for helping to bring Eric to the discussion here. But also working as Vice President of the Association to help with the employment of executives, APEC, and also having a lot of experience with digital privacy issues, working for a French council on IT and data protection. So maybe just to bring your perspective, because I know you, Eric, and Force Ouvrière Cadre have done a lot of work to try to think about how to make sure we have really a social technological dialogue in order to think about how we implement AI in the workplace. So Eric, look forward to your reflections.
Merci Karen, et excusez-moi de vous imposer cette traduction.
Yes, thank you, and apologies for speaking in French. IA, I'm sure, will help me speak better English in the near future. Anyway, back to this issue of the social dialogue that was mentioned by Lucas before. This is fundamental. You cannot tomorrow, if you want to increase your productivity, if you want to have more productivity gains, if you want to have more competitive companies, you cannot save or you cannot spare the social dialogue. I mean, the economy has to be part of that debate and that dialogue. I mean, Lucas said there was no productivity gain. In particular, this is the case in France, and we carried out a study, and it's rather surprising. You'll be surprised to hear that today in France, there's only 1 in 10 companies that actually have a subscription to ChatGPT. 1 in 10 that have planned training their employees. 1 in 10 that have a charter, and 70% of French companies, in particular the largest companies, have never mentioned the issue of using AI tools in order to improve competitiveness, productivity, or working conditions. So, in a nutshell, it's not just an issue of skills or qualifications or education, it's also a question of being mature enough. And contrary to what you may think, companies are not necessarily prepared to accept the rollout within the company of such technological tools. Back to the trade union, which is my hat. We're not here to hamper innovation or to invent anything new, but rather to set the challenges straight. There's 5 challenges out of 10, which we are pushing for, and we developed this document to tell employers that what the stakes were concerning AI. And we've not talked to anyone for the time being. It's very difficult to convince anyone. This is very specific, and of course, there are several challenges. There's the issue of employment, but employment raises another issue, which is fundamental, that was mentioned by Skill Lab, and that's been the case for quite some time, and it's even more the case today. And I'll go back to what Lucas said before. The difference with AI is that it encapsulates cognitive processes, and this requires, it does not just require physical strength, so it touches engineers. So there's a challenge in terms of training, but training not just on top of employment, but it's part of employment. So jobs should include the issue of training and education on a permanent basis. And this is a real challenge. Then I'm a trade unionist. So of course, we need to focus on the choices made by companies. If AI is used to maximize your financial profitability, then it will be a failure. In the long term, it will be a failure, an economic and social failure, for sure. However, if it is used to upskill, to improve working conditions, to innovate, then, of course, there are many avenues for improvements. Secondly, if I may, Karen, there's the issue of working conditions. We tend to forget that getting used to AI, owning these tools requires quite a lot of work and training, and this is not obvious. And when people tell you that the machine can do better than you can, then you wonder, what am I worth? And some engineers tell us that when they get to work, I won't mention anyone, I won't mention the company I'm talking about, but sometimes they were invited to leave their brains in the glove compartment of their cars, because most of the time it's expert systems that actually make the decision. So this system, this environment is very challenging. I mean, people are worried, am I going to disappear? When is my expertise going to lose its value? And this is a key challenge from an economic point of view. How can executives actually sell their expertise when their expertise is actually included and offered for free in technology? That's a challenge. And then there's the issue of intensification, of course. I will talk about banking and insurance later. It's rather surprising when you talk to the employees and the employers, by the way. In 70% of cases, employees hear that they are already using AI tools. And there's the issue of loyalty. I mean, the companies develop that, but it's confidential. But then they're told, no, don't worry, this is for your own good. And this is to improve your working conditions. So you're getting rid of the weakest added value tasks to focus on a task with a high added value. But what does it mean? It means that there is less time for free time. It means that the tasks you're facing are even more complex, and that work is increasingly intensive, which raises other challenges. Now, in a nutshell, the issue of management also, this is something we saw during COVID. It was very interesting to see that technology is just like the tide. When it goes out, then you see who's in a good situation or not. When facing a crisis, then you see who is a good manager and who isn't. And managing based on data is not something everyone can do. And unfortunately, there's quite a few managers who think they have so much power or clout when they manage based on data, but you do not manage companies based on data only. And there's another dimension which is essential, which is to provide support and guidance. And we have this plea. We believe that these issues should be included from the outset with the employees based on their tasks. And together we can build these tools rather than having your manager come in overnight and say, well, we've decided this has to be implemented today. This is not going to work. And so this is truly an issue in terms of management, which is not a solution, because unfortunately today we are facing very archaic management. People believe that being more productive is being more present and working flat out. And two more things, if I may. For 10 years, I was the Vice President of the National Commission of Data privacy in France, and we were here to sanction companies financially when they did not play by the rules in terms of privacy. Now, of course, there are regulations. I won't talk about these, but there's one key issue when talking about management, and as part of technology, you need to have management that is supported by trust and confidence and not oversight. And today, the issue with those tools is that they are measuring, quantifying, mapping, checking. And in such a system, to be honest, the innovative, creative ability might be lost, and we might be facing a challenge in terms of productivity and having the loyalty of experts within companies. There again, I'm speaking as a trade unionist, but there will be productivity gains. Of course there will. But these productivity gains today will mean we will help highlight what needs to be done in terms of investments in that particular industry as of today. And once you have those productivity gains, then you need to share that added value that is created. So, and the challenge is how can we do that in the long term? And that needs to be doubled with upskilling, education, training. And so those productivity gains, of course, there's an increase in wages that is quite natural. But at the same time, we need to reinject funds in support for SMEs, in particular in remote, non-urban regions, to actually help boost those skills. Hence, the need to avoid that technology as of today becomes an element of actually capturing the value that is created for the employers only. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Eric. It's true that also the OECD, some colleagues had done a study that showed that, of course, when you work with the workers in implementing this, you get a much higher rate of satisfaction and confiance in what's happening. So I think you've raised a huge number of big questions, and I hope everyone is also thinking about that for their own for their own work. And you mentioned a lot about investing in small firms, and I wanted to bring Sebastiano to the table, who represents the European Digital SME Alliance, and I know you're part of our OECD's Digital for SME initiative, trying to think about how small and medium-sized enterprises can make the most of digital opportunities. And you're also so you're also creating and benefiting from some of these new ICT inventions like ChatGPT. Can you tell us a little bit about what are the challenges you're seeing in making sure that you're able to keep up the small firms, as well as making sure you have the talent to do the work that you want to do?
Thank you, Karen. Well, first of all, it's an honor also to be here and also to come after the voice of the unions, because I think we, as representative of SMEs, we also share many of the concerns and the objectives that you share with us, in particular the vision for, let's say, a more democratic distribution of wealth and a more democratic distribution of the competencies. And I think, of course, SMEs are a vehicle to ensure a more democratic society, a more democratic economy, at least. We are an association, a private organization whose members are European companies and national associations, and we have, as such, a particular point of view, because what we observe are digital companies, digital SMEs, so companies which have already gone a little bit farther ahead in this digital transition. And I think it's important because we observing by these type of companies, you can gain lessons on what works and what not in terms also of policies, in terms of government support or public support for the right transition. We have a couple of resources which I want to mention here, which are probably interesting if some people in the audience wants to dig into a little bit. One is a white paper we just published surveying around 12,000 SMEs around Europe, which is about essentially a vision how to, it's called Skills for European Digital Leadership. And it's an evidence-based blueprint that wants to help the European Union to go through towards this objective of union of skills. The second one is a European funded initiative, which is called ARISA. ARISA is an initiative funded by the EU that wants to do what we're trying to say today, which is exactly provide companies and people the skills, especially in AI, which are needed for this AI transition. And in terms of analysis, I will start from a figure which is similar to what I heard previously, which is the last DESI report, the index provided by the European Commission on EU member states, which is in 2022, I believe it said that only 8% of companies reported using AI. And this is indeed, very much in line with what I heard. What are the barriers? Why are we there? Indeed, skills is often reported as the first and fundamental shortage which we have. Perhaps it's interesting to note, if we survey companies that are already in the tech sector, even there you see there are issues, because really the supposed productivity gains or advantages that one should have by using AIs are still perhaps to be fully demonstrated. We perceive a lot of difficulties by these companies. Only surveying such companies, on average in Europe, we come up with only 33% of companies are reporting to, in the tech sector, are reporting to actually have started projects in AI, and the majority of them, unfortunately, they report they are implementing AI only with a single purpose objective, which is indicative of the fact that there are difficulties in integrating AI systems in the existing legacy technologies of companies. There are obviously differences among countries, and if we have time, I can walk you through some of the data. What is, from our point of view, also interesting is to note that because precisely what we said, we want a more democratic technology. We have in Europe really thousands and thousands of companies, startups, small innovative businesses, which are at the forefront. They are those that are able to take the generative AI and solve concrete problems. And so we are really, we should be proud of having so many successful initiatives that make our economy also stronger. And altogether, we have in Europe several hundreds of thousands of tech companies which are themselves trying actively to upskill the rest of the companies and the rest of the businesses, the rest of society, I would say more in general. And we have a lot of initiatives by the companies and by their organizations which are actively investing in training people, in upskilling the workforce. Let me just mention a few. We have academies and internal training programs provided by national associations. In Spain, we have Conetic. In France, we have one which was famous by Eben. We have Asintel in Italy, Uniso in Belgium, and so on and so forth. Skillnet Ireland in Ireland. In Belgium, because I am resident in Brussels, they launched a very important initiative called VIA, which is an AI academy, which is going to train tens of thousands of people, especially in small businesses. And this is the type of initiatives that maybe are not particularly visible, because this is not if you see the press, the statements we have from American tech companies, Microsoft, Google, and so, which come and say, we're going to train 1 million people or 10 million people in the next year. The reality is very much on the ground by smaller companies and their organizations, which in a collective effort are really trying to promote the upskilling and reskilling of the workforce. And they are those who actually own the technology. And so they are actively transferring the technology to the rest of the economy.
Great. Thank you so much. Sebastiano, and I think also, small firms, medium-sized enterprises are very anchored in their local communities and play a really key role for all sorts of aspects of local economic development. I know that we're running tight on time because we're already at 4:30. So what I'm going to do is maybe just ask all of our panelists if they want to have any final reflections on today's discussion, because I would love and personally would stay here for the next hour and a half, but I don't know if everyone else is able to in their schedule. So maybe I'll just turn back to you, Sonia, if you want to jump in on any other final reflections as you're thinking about, the current situation and the sort of rollout of generative AI, from wearing your different hats at Randstad and the World Employment Confederation.
I can only add to this very interesting conversation and discussion that I believe that Gen AI is here to stay. It will feel like a bit of a disruption at the very beginning, like the arrival of the internet did at its beginning. At the same time, I feel it will be more an evolution rather than a revolution in that sense. We know that labor markets will always adapt to anything that is actually thrown at them in terms of trends and developments. And with that, I'm still a positive minded person in the sense that I see a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of room for improvement when it comes to effectiveness and efficient working of labor markets, and definitely a lot of room for better labor market outcomes when it comes to creating more sustainable but also more equitable and talent-driven labor markets. So with that, I'll hand back to you, Karen.
Great, thank you so much, Sonia. Ulrich, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think, really focusing on AI technology, it's clearly revolutionary on the technology side. When it comes to this dissemination of the technology, it's going to take very uneven patterns and also more time than tech companies want us to believe. So, but on the unevenness, what I find very interesting is the regional split. I mean, this is very much a knowledge economy impact, which is very urban. But then what's a little bit more worrying is that the things in the knowledge economy that are easier to automate are entry-level jobs. So these are the first jobs that people usually have when they start their career in something. So if we start removing those, that's going to create more barriers for youth unemployment. And equally, there is a much lower adoption rate of more mature and older workers, which themselves makes them more vulnerable if this really starts to cause major shifts through the technology. So all to say, this is going to come in very unevenly across society, and it's important to make sure that there is an equal access to opportunity.
Great, thank you so much. Eric, que pensez-vous?
Well, evolution and revolution, well, very quickly, it can be a revolution in terms, it can be a restoration in a way, in the French sense of the word. If there's no normalization, if there's no framing or framework, then you can go back to a feudal system. So we have to be very careful, capturing value on the one hand and micro workers on the other hand. That's very precarious, very dangerous. And there's a danger of dividing the labor market between those who have power and clout and those who don't and have no education and cannot invest in AI because it would not be profitable anyway. So we have to be very careful about this. Then I'm I think we need to talk about this as a trade unionist. If we're loyal if we are honest in our companies, then we can make progress. There are three key principles. Why should we develop AI within a company? Should it be there to cut jobs or to kill jobs or to support a technological breakthrough change? That's the first question. Second question, is it proportioned? Is it the only choice? Automating tellers in the supermarkets doesn't bring anything. Proportionality, loyalty. If you have these three principles, which are based on justice, then you can have innovation and protection, which can go hand in hand. But to do that, to achieve that, you need to have a dialogue, and we can start that with my Italian colleague for a start. Thanks.
Yes, very quickly, because we are very late. For me, the single most strategic and important question we have to ask ourselves when we talk about AI is what are we going to do in a world which has a very highly concentrated market of AI, generative AI. This technology is now in the hands of a handful of companies. We have to start from that, okay? Is this the kind of world we want to live in, or do we want government to intervene? And as SMEs, but also as workers, I believe, and as society, as democracy, more in general, I think we have to ask ourselves that question, because we cannot just blindly go into a dystopian reality where the single most important technology of our times is gonna be monopolized by a handful of companies. And I'll leave it to that.
Thank you so much. And I think hopefully, you know, with the OECD, we have an AI recommendation that also is out there to help governments to think about some of these questions and address some of the issues that you raised. So I just want to flag that a lot of the reports and statistics that our panelists cited, we posted online in Zoom, but just to know that you can access these online. So several of our panelists mentioned that. I do want to thank all of you, plus our audience. We have a few hundred online, as well as those here in the room. Want to thank the team that helped put this report together as well, the leadership of our center, as well as all of those who put together the data, analyze the data, draft the reports, and just want to highlight again, Augustine Basori, Antonella Mio, Lawrence Birch, and Patricia Penalosa, as well as the many colleagues who help us put on these events and communicate about them and communicate with each other through interpretation with our interpreters here in the room. And just wanted to remind everybody that if you'd like a country-specific presentation of the report, there are country pages online. We'd be pleased to go and do a bit more of a deep dive. Lucas himself has his suitcase to go to Vienna to do that tomorrow in Austria, so don't hesitate to let us know. If you want to share this with others, the recording will be online. I also want to flag that the OECD has a big conference as well on AI, looking at issues of work, innovation, productivity, and skills on the 12th and 13th of December. So you can Google it and check that out. And just to say that through the LEAD program, our local development forum, we have many other activities coming up in December on a range of topics, whether it's reviving volunteering, addressing labor shortages in the retail and job quality in the retail sector, looking at industrial policy and what that means for local jobs. So check all of that out. And thank you again for joining us here in the room and online.